We pick up 9-5 offsuit in the big blind. 5 players limp in, I check, the flop comes ace 9-5 with a couple of diamonds, we've got bottom 2 pair. The small blind checks, I check, under the gun checks, under the gun +1 who we've battled with in the previous 2 hands, bets 15. The hijack makes the call, the cutoff folds, the small blind calls. There are a lot of people showing interest in this pot. Let's see if that's still the case when I raise to 100. Under the gun folds, under the gun +1 also folds. The hijack is a stubborn dude who doesn't want to let me have it. He calls. The small blind folds, it's heads up, and there are a lot of cards that I won't want to see, especially diamonds. The 5 of clubs comes out, and that's one that I'm okay with because now we're at the Hustler motorboating. I've never been at a Hustler establishment motorboating and not had a good time. Since there was no raise pre-flop and our check raise got called on the flop, it's very probable that the opponent was on some type of draw and now has 0 outs. If he had a good ace, he would have raised pre-flop. We don't want to scare him off with a big bet. I put out 115 to string him along. Apparently, even the small sizing is too much. The player folds. I show the table that we filled up. The hijack would later tell me that he made a disciplined laydown with 8-7 of diamonds. He folded a flush draw with the gutter and had no chance of winning the pot. Still, a lot of people can't fold draws that big, particularly when they're getting a good price. Here we pick up king 9 suited under the gun +1. There's a straddle out there. I raised to 30. 4 players call. We're going 5 ways to the flop. It comes ace 8-4 rainbow. Not much going on for us in this hand or seemingly anyone else who still has cards. We all check. The turn is the king of diamonds giving us second pair. It's check to me. If the big blind or under the gun player had an ace, they probably would have bet by now. If the middle position opponent or the hijack had an ace, one of them probably would have bet on the flop. I could be best with a king. I put out a small bet at 40. I don't want to make it too big just in case someone's lurking around with an ace or a better king. 3 opponents call. No one seems to be very happy though. They just didn't want to let me win with a tiny bet. I'm planning to shut down. Then the dealer puts out another king. We're back open for business, dudes. We've got trips. Checks to me. I'm really hoping that someone has an ace at this point. I bet 120 for value. The hijack folds. The big blind's in the tank. He knows that it's down to him and the under the gun opponent to keep me honest. He's not sure if under the gun will be able to make the call, so the big blind puts his foot down and matches my bet. He's not going to let me bluff this one. Under the gun folds. I show that there's no bluff this time. King 9's good. We get a great run out in a multi-way pot, and we get paid off on the river. The bet sizes weren't that large, but with so many opponents calling pre-flop and on the turn, we profit $400 on the hand and are up $350 on the day. In this one, we've got pocket 7s in the hijack. I raised to 20. I can't even get past one player. The cutoff 3 bets to 65. The small blind calls. I don't see that the big blind still has cards and is on the brink of folding. I call out a turn on accident.
Hey, well, I mean,
he was holding the hand.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's right.
I didn't see that. Going 4 ways?
Oh, you're gonna win the pot now. You're about to fold.
We're going 4 ways to the flop with 2 opponents that have good hands and 1 opponent who may not love his cards too much, but he was getting 3-1 on a call once he knew that I wasn't going to 4-bet behind him. The flop comes jack 6-3 with 2 diamonds. We've got second pair and some backdoor draws. We really wanted to hit a set, and that didn't happen though. It checks to me. I checked at the pre-flop 3-better. He surprisingly checks back. I doubt that he checked with top pair or anything stronger aside from maybe a set of jacks. The turn is another jack. It's possible that we've got the best hand. Small blind checks. The big blind hesitates a little and then bets 140. This is the player that almost folded pre-flop. He might be betting with a hand like ace-6 suited or 6-5 suited. He's a squirrely guy who could possibly think that he only has to get through me to win with a bet, since there's no reason to believe that the small blind who was checked twice or the cutoff checked back the flop has a good hand. Even though I could be best, I don't want to call here and allow anyone behind me to call. I overrep my hand and I raised to 350 to pretend like I've either got trip jacks, which I certainly will have in my range, or a full house with pocket 6s or 3s, which I'll also have in my range. An added benefit is that I'll get hands like 8s, 9s, and 10s to fold. My play will also ensure that anyone with a flush draw or overs will fold despite having equity. 350 is another somewhat small sizing from me. Remember, I used this small sizing when I actually had a full house with 9-5 on the turn earlier. I'm using it as a bluff here, and if the big blind actually has trips or a full house himself, I'm not going to lose quite as much money. The cutoff folds quickly. The small blind takes much longer before he eventually lets his cards go as well. It's down to the big blind who shows 1-9 face up. Then he folds before explaining why he almost didn't even call pre-flop.
I was going to fold him because I thought he had an overpair. God.
In 9s?
Yes.
Alright, we got that one through. I wasn't sure what to do with that hand, to be honest.
That was a strange spot to be in, but my play works out. I was able to deny equity from hands that I was beating, and I also got a hand that had me in terrible shape to fold. Then we had to table number 3 where I'm dealt pocket aces, my very first hand here. The under the gun opponent was having some fun live trolling me as I set my racket chips down. He was calling me a nit, which is kind of funny considering I just got a big bluff through minutes earlier. I now have a good hand to punish him with after he raises to 15. The cutoff calls, I 3-bet to 80. I'm in a great situation because it looks like I may just be trying to get a bluff through on a guy who called me a nit to prove him wrong. In reality, I've got the best hand possible. Under the gun calls for 65 more. The cutoff also calls. We're going 3 ways to the flop, and the under the gun player may be Nostradamus because he correctly calls my hand, and then he makes a prediction. That sounds like a pretty good plan to me. I hope it becomes a reality. The dealer puts out 9-7-3 with 2 clubs. I have the ace of clubs, making it so I don't have to be too worried about someone having a flush draw and a 3-bet pot. I check to give my opponent some rope on a flop that typically won't be good for my range. The under the gun and cutoff both have relatively small stacks that I can still get all of, even if it checks through. The opponents don't fall for my trap, and it does check through. The turn is the jack of hearts. Time to get as much money piled in as possible. I bet 125. The cutoff actually only has 120 in her stack. Under the gun calls, leaving himself with 395 behind. Maybe he has ace jack or king jack. The cutoff thinks for a while before folding. It's down to heads up. The river is the 5 of spades. It's basically a brick. Under the gun has less than a pot-sized bet left in his stack. I bet an amount that has him covered. He correctly guessed my hand pre-flop, but perhaps my check on the flop has thrown him off the scent. After tanking for almost a minute, the opponent comes to a decision.
Had it read right from the beginning.
Did.
Bad turn.
When he says bad turn, I imagine that we were right with the assessment that he had top pair. We don't sack everyone, but we do fulfill some of Nostradamus' prophecy by stacking him with aces. That's a big pot that has us winning over 1,200. We didn't get off to a good start today. It's not about how you start though, it's about how you finish. We're dealt ace queen once more, under the gun +1. Under the gun limps in. We need to make the limper pay. I raise to 25. The cutoff calls. Under the gun calls as well. We're going 3 ways to the flop, and it comes king jack 10 rainbow. We flop the nuts. What's better is that under the gun leads for 25. I don't have much to be worried about. I call with plans to make a move on the turn. The cutoff folds. It's down to heads up. The turn is the jack of diamonds. The board pairing isn't ideal. Still, we probably have the best hand. The opponent isn't afraid. He bets 75. Despite no longer having the nuts, I stick with my initial plan and I raise to 200. Not much time goes by before the opponent announces a call. I'd love to see it blank on the river. We get one. The dealer puts out the 7 of spades. We should still have the best hand. Under the gun checks. I'm going to continue betting for value. I make it 400. It'd be great if the opponent had trip jacks or at least a king. 45 seconds goes by, then the player folds. Someone else at the table would ask him if he had king queen, and he said that he had worse than that. Maybe he had king 10 and was counterfeited. It seemed more likely to me by the way that he responded that he had a hand like queen 10 or worse. We win a nice pot.